in order to impose or implement this act, one had to show evidence that there was concern that there was an imminent threat or violence or emergency. Has the government shown such evidence? They had several days in which they I guess they could have gathered that evidence and presented it to the parliament, but everything then was retracted. So did the government at any point show sufficient evidence?
I think the answer to that question is no. And I think, given the fact that everybody has smartphones and there's a lot of video on the internet about what was actually going on in the streets of Ottawa, that it would be very difficult for them to do so. The War Measures Act was for war, and the Emergencies Act is for analogous extreme situations, which just didn't exist at that time.
Right. So given, that there, in your opinion, that there was a lack of evidence shown, and given that people did have bank accounts frozen and persons were arrested, what is the JCCF going to do about it?
The Justice Centre has filed litigation on this issue, along with other civil liberties groups, and I understand that there's litigation coming from governments right away. And the reason is because people had their properties seized without due process. And in the Western world, you have an understanding that when you work for something, you build something up, it's there for you to have. It's yours. You worked for it, and that the government is going to protect it. And that's not what happened here. They seized it without due process. The Emergencies Act is not due process, right? There was no convictions or criminal proceedings or court proceedings. All of a sudden, just your bank account is frozen and you can't pay bills. And so we represent ex-military and ex-RCMP officers who are decorated individuals who were peacefully protesting, or they were financially gave some contribution to the protest. And I'm sure their intention was to only support a lawful and legitimate protest. And so when their bank accounts were frozen, it was a big surprise to them. They can't pay their mortgage. They can't buy groceries. They can't, their whole lives are shut down. And on the thinnest of legal pretenses, because the government told the banks, you have to do this. And the banks, instead of challenging that, they just complied with it. And so that's very concerning. It is a seizure under as per Section 8 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so there are a lot of legal questions that have to be answered, and the litigation has been filed.
And I think there were a lot of questions with some of the opposition parties, the parliamentarians, the MPs. There seemed to be even more questions or more of a hesitation to allow this to go forward in the Senate chambers. And my previous guest, he was shedding some of the more political background on that. It seemed that Justin Trudeau wasn't going to get this passed by the Senate. That sort of seemed to be the indication. There was the pressure from the bank, but there was also pressure in the Senate. Given that, again, it was quickly introduced and then quickly, I suppose you could say, suspended or withdrawn, how do you think your court case will go? And what's the timeline for something like this?
Well, first of all, it's been sent to case management because of all the parties that are involved. As to how it's going to go, the court is going to look at the Constitution and the Charter, and it's not going to have a difficult time concluding that this freezing of bank accounts and the extreme actions were taken that infringe the Charter were a concern. The question it's going to grapple with is whether or not that's justified under Section 1 of the Charter, because the Emergencies Act is subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So it's going to be interesting to see what the court says. But on the face of it, people around the world have a lot of concerns about what happened in Ottawa with respect to government overreach and authoritarianism. And it won't be surprising if the courts also have similar concerns.
Well, in conversations, personal conversations with friends from various international countries, they were shocked that something like this could happen in Canada, or that there was such a tool that existed for the government to use. Given, again, the international collective shock, if you will, should we anticipate perhaps something like this being used again in the near future?
Certainly hope not. It's not for everyday use. We have hundreds and thousands of laws on the books in Canada that could have been used and simply weren't used prior to getting to the Emergencies Act.